second reading, SB 339. Clerk will read the bill.
SB 339 by L type, relating to the medical use of low THC cannabis and the regulation of related organizations and individuals, requiring a dispensing organization to obtain a license to dispense low THC cannabis and any employee of a dispensing organization to obtain a registration, authorizing fees.
Chair recognizes Dr. Zerwas and Mr. Isaac.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Before we embark on the debate and discussion on Senate Bill 339, I want to take a moment to recognize up in the gallery today a group of people who have been up there all afternoon, a number of families who have been very diligently engaged with the House Bill 892 and Senate Bill 339, which is the one we're about to take up. I'm proud to be a joint author on the Senate bill as well as a joint author on the House bill on what I think is really a very, very important piece of legislation that's going to open up access to the CBD oil for people with severe, intractable epilepsy. I want to thank these people that are here today. I'd like to ask them to stand so that we can recognize them and welcome to your Texas House of Representatives. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is the group from the Cafe Texas, or Compassionate Access for Epilepsy here in Texas. Some of the names that are up there are Karen Whitty, Cheryl Kubala, Nina Octis, Katie Sanders, Morgan Rubin, Sarah Jane Toney, and my constituent Terry Carricker. Thank you for your work in this legislative session, and I think we're going to turn things over to Representative Click.
Chair recognizes Ms. Click.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Senate Bill 39 is a companion bill to my House Bill 892. Senate Bill 339 makes low THC cannabidiol oil available for treating patients with intractable epilepsy. Currently, 14 states have advanced CBD legislation. Intractable epilepsy is a seizure disorder that has been treated with at least 2 anti-epileptic drugs at maximum dosages without relief from seizures. Approximately 149,000 Texans have intractable epilepsies, about the number, just shy of the number of people that live in each of our legislative House districts. Dravet and Lennox-Gastaut syndromes, children suffer dozens, even hundreds of seizures per week. Just since the start of session, 2 children with intractable epilepsy have died as a result of extended seizures. Few FDA-approved anti-epileptic drugs are approved for usage in children. No FDA-approved anti-epileptic drugs are available for Dravet syndrome. CBD oil is a derivative of low THC cannabis, defined as less than 0.5% and greater than 10% CBD by weight. It has few side effects. It also is not something that you can get high on. It has no street value, so it has a low risk of abuse. It's shown remarkable promise. A pharmaceutical version is already in development, but many years away from widespread usage. This is not something that can be smoked. It is ingested orally. I've worked closely with the Epilepsy Foundation of Texas, patient families, and other medical specialists from around the state. My bill places strict controls on the use of CBD oil, DPS oversight and regulation of licenses, and the Compassionate Use Registry. Only licensed physicians who treat epilepsy and are certified epileptologists or neurologists can prescribe CBD oil once they believe it to be in the best interest of the patient. Patients must have another physician concur with the original physician's prescriptions. Patients must be permanent residents of Texas. In closing, SB 339 is not a recreational marijuana bill. It is not a broad medical marijuana bill. It is very narrowly drafted, very focused bill designed to give people with intractable epilepsy another option when others have failed. We want to add one more tool to the treating physician's toolbox to fight these disorders.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. King, for what purpose?
would the gentlelady yield for a question?
Ms. Click, do you yield for questions?
Yes, I'll yield for a question.
Lady yields.
Okay, thank you. And I'll be honest with you, I'm struggling with this a little bit. So this is a very legitimate question because I'm very sensitive to families that have given very sincere testimony and expressed very sincere concerns. Is there anything in Texas law that prohibits, well, let me rephrase that. Can the FDA approve this independently without any action from Texas? Can it be approved as a pharmaceutical today by the FDA?
There's another product right now, Marinol, that's a synthetic version of THC, which is also another component of the cannabis plant.
So is the FDA in the process of evaluating this? Do they have trials going on or anything
There
to
are
approve it?
trials that are going on presently, and it would be probably 8 to 10 years before this would be available.
Are you aware of any other time that we have, as a state, gone around that FDA process and approved something for pharmaceutical use for treatment, or is this a first time?
There are a variety of compassionate use parameters that are out there that allow that to be made available.
Okay, so there are things currently used in Texas where the legislature came in advance of the FDA and said, we want to allow this. So that's currently going on today and other things?
One of the other things is something called off-label use. The children that are currently receiving seizure medication right now, many of those seizure meds are not FDA approved for children.
Are those
They've gone
things that
through-
we've let, and I'm really just trying to make sure I understand this. Are there, I'm trying to find out if we've done things like this before. Are there times that we've gone as a legislature and approved things to be used in medical treatment that the FDA has not approved?
Yes, and one of the things that we did earlier this session is we passed legislation for the right to try.
Right, okay, correct, that's a good point. And are we hearing from, because I'll be honest with you, I haven't. I've heard from families, but I haven't had anyone in the medical community tell me that they need this.
If
So
you
have
will
you,
look-
can you tell me about the medical community and who's been coming to you, if anybody, and saying they need this?
If you look at the letter that I presented in the member packet, there is a letter from epileptologists from around the state. They were who came to me after last legislative session and felt like this was a very promising new treatment for these resistant forms of epilepsy.
Okay. Who will be able to prescribe this? Will a general practitioner or a...
No, only a neurologist or an epileptologist will be able to prescribe this. And it actually takes the recommendation or of two, not just one, but two.
And where will they get it at?
The legislation sets up a framework of dispensaries that they would be able to get that. There would be a minimum of 3 in the state.
And are those like compound pharmacies, or are they like a regular pharmacy, or?
They are not like a pharmacy, but they would function in many ways like a compounding pharmacy, although they're not a compounding pharmacy.
And is it your intent to try to keep amendments off of this?
Yes, sir, it is.
I mean, some of us are very concerned of people being able to bring things in from Colorado or other states where things are legalized that we're not trying to even talk about here.
The problem with someone trying to bring in products from another state is that would violate federal law.
Okay.
And so many of the states that have passed their own CBD-only legislation have prohibitions from taking that across state lines.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Simmons, for what purpose?
I'd like to ask Representative Click a few questions.
Lady yields.
Yes.
Thank you, Representative Click. Appreciate that. You know, I had two of my children had seizures when they were younger, and we were able to get those under control through medication. So I can empathize a little bit with these families that have this. Would you explain again, though, the specific type of seizure that this is going to be used for? I'm not sure I understand exactly what that type of seizure is.
Intractable epilepsy, those are patients that have tried 2 pharmaceutical products and are still not well controlled. Many of these children, particularly with Dravet and Lennox-Gastaut, have some hundreds of seizures each and every day. The families must carry rescue medications, oxygen, pulse oximeter. Some of the meds that they have to give in the event that they have a seizure or multiple seizures that do not end are things like Valium. Yeah, these are very dangerous. These children.
My mom, oddly enough, at age 70 began having seizures. And while she doesn't have them very often, they have not been able to be controlled yet by medication. So I understand where we're coming from. Though, I think like a lot of members of this House are concerned a little bit about the camel's nose under the tent. I am firmly against legalizing marijuana at this stage. I'm firmly against legalizing just normal, what one would think normal medical marijuana. And so help us understand how this can prevent, because Colorado in some ways started similar to what we're doing, is what some of the information I've heard, maybe not. So explain to me how you think we can keep this in the box so that we don't, don't promote the moving, on down the road.
We have a very narrowly drafted bill, and I share your desire to not become a state where we have legalized recreational use or a broader medical statute. Our legislation is very narrowly focused to just one condition, intractable epilepsy.
So it's not for multiple sclerosis, which I know in some cases people swear by marijuana to help them with that as well, but this is not for that. It's not for cancer or anything like that. It's for this one specific issue.
It is for intractable epilepsy, and you have to have the recommendation of 2, either neurologists or an epileptologist.
Tell me again, how will it be administered? Is this an oil? I remember we went to something in the interim where the people spoke about it.
It is administered orally. It is not smoked. In fact, the law that we are trying to pass prohibits it from being smoked.
Right, and this bill also includes licensing of the people that are dispensing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So there is a state license and oversight.
The oversight would be by DPS.
It'll be by DPS. So it'll be the license, and they'll pay a fee for the license and what have you?
That's correct. The licensing fee will pay for the program.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to have the conversation between Representative Click and I included in the journal, please.
Members, you've heard the motion. Is there objection? Chair is none, so ordered. Mr. Phillips, for what purpose?
Will the gentlelady yield, please, for some questions?
Yes, for questions.
Thank you. I do want to congratulate you on bringing a thoughtful legislation and trying to limit it and trying to keep it so focused that nobody can say that they're voting to legalize marijuana in the state of Texas. I do appreciate your efforts, and so I want to say that up front.
Thank you.
Although you would agree with me that if you vote for this, you are legalizing marijuana in this state. Is that correct?
I would disagree with that. What we are making available is an extract from the cannabis plant.
Okay, from marijuana. Is cannabis marijuana same? I want to make sure whether it's spelled, depending on how it's spelled, cannabis and marijuana are the same thing. Is that correct?
That is the same species.
Okay, and I want to make sure I understand that the FDA has a process which we rely on to approve drugs that can be sold to be used by children. Is that correct?
They have a process for drugs approval, but presently any derivative of the cannabis plant is a Schedule I, and it's been very difficult at all for many products to be developed in this country. Even the pharmaceutical company that's developing a pharmaceutical grade product, they're from the UK. They're not a U.S. company.
Okay, but we do in this country have a process that we can rely on to make sure that we, as best, have safe drugs. Is that correct?
We do, and that process takes 8 to 10 years from a product being developed.
And have you heard of the term orphan drug?
Yes, I have.
And isn't it true that the FDA has indicated this is a orphan drug?
There is a pharmaceutical grade product that would be considered an orphan drug that is in the works. They are doing the testing, but it may be years before that's available, Representative Phillips.
It could be years or it could be 12 months.
I doubt
Could
that it
be
would
24
12
months. How come we've not had this bill brought before? I mean, previously it was cancer to get to the gateway to have legalization of marijuana, and now it appears to be this is the start.
I would say that the big difference is with these children with intractable epilepsy, they have exhausted all of their pharmaceutical options. They have nothing else. I talked to a father recently who has a 14-month-old son who has Dravet syndrome. The son began to develop liver failure from one of the drugs that they typically prescribe. The physician told this father that your only options are to move to a state that CBD would be permitted or consult hospice, because we have nothing else to offer your son.
Again, there are probably a wide range of drugs out there for all kinds of illnesses that are not legal that people would like to have. And so now we're doing something in law that we've not done for any other drug. Is that correct, in the state?
We have got compassionate use in other areas. And earlier this session, we also passed the right to try legislation.
Right. And this right here, this legislation right here, allows for and license, you call them distributors, but they're really marijuana growers. Is that correct?
They are dispensaries.
Pardon me?
They're dispensaries.
But they cultivate it. They go out and they plant marijuana, they grow it, and then they're going to dispense it, the marijuana. Who makes it into the oil?
The dispensaries process it.
Okay. And who decides whether it's low or high THC?
There's a testing that is done on that. And what you may not understand is there are different varieties of the plant, some that are low in THC, that are high in CBD. So it depends on the variety of the plant.
Who's going to test that?
The testing parameters would be set up through DPS.
DPS, so DPS is going to have to test all of these plants that are grown?
That or contract with another person to do the testing. But it's very important to be consistent in concentration so that we know that the patients are getting the appropriate medication.
And a lot of that is we don't know, but other states have done this, is what you're saying.
Other states have done this. 14, in fact. Oklahoma just passed their statute 18 days ago.
Right. And in Colorado, they passed this way back in 2000. Is that correct?
Colorado is a broader medical state. What they are doing there is very different than what we're doing here.
But that's the start to get us to where they were in 2013, where they legalized completely.
They started out with a very broad medical statute. That's not what we're trying to do here in Texas.
And I tell you what, like I said, I do appreciate your passion for this, and the people that are standing up with you are some of the nicest and big-hearted human beings that we have in this house, and I appreciate why they're there. But I just disagree that this is the step we need to take in the state of Texas. But I do appreciate your very hard work on this and educating us in a major way.
Mr. Elkins raises a point of order. The lady's time has expired. Point of order is well taken.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Wally, for what purpose?
Would Representative, can I get, well,
The lady's time's expired on her layout.
may I ask for an extension of time, please? It's a very important issue that we
Members,
need to
is
get
there
on the record.
objection? Chair is none, so ordered.
Representative Click,
Ms.
would
Click, do you
you,
yield for questions? Lady
Yes.
yields.
thank you, I appreciate that. Representative Click, would you agree with that this procedure or medication would save children's lives?
I do believe that it would. The families that have gone to other states to receive this treatment have seen great results.
And could you describe in detail the emotional, physical, psychological, and financial hardships that families have to endure by having to travel from, let's just say, from Texas to Colorado, just to be able to save their children's lives?
The primary difficulty is they are going away from physicians that have been treating their child for some time, their support system in traveling to another state. It's very difficult on these families. Usually one of the parents is the primary caregiver, and these children require 24-hour care around the clock. Many of these children also have what's called nocturnal seizures, which is seizures at nighttime. And many of these parents will tell me that, they are very concerned when their child is sleeping at night as to whether or not they'll be alive when they go in to wake them up in the morning.
Right, and just that emotional stress of having to be up 24/7, and in this case, at night, for fear that your child might die because they don't have the proper medication.
That's correct.
And that also puts a strain on maybe on a marriage, is that correct?
It does. And I just recently met a family that not only has one child with Dravet syndrome, but they have two.
And I know the fear is that, and I don't want to joke about this, but because it's, and I don't want to be lighthearted about this, but there seems to be this fear that children are going to start smoking pot.
Yeah, this is orally administered. Many of these children, in addition to their seizure disorder, also test on the autism spectrum.
That's right.
They have intellectual and developmental disabilities. Their gait is very impaired due to the problems that they've got. These are children that require care around the clock and will probably always require care around the clock.
And by not doing what you're trying to do here, we continue to add on to the stress for these families. Is that correct?
Not only the stress of the families, but the cost of caring for these children. Many of these children, when they go into what is referred to as status epilepticus, end up in the hospital and sometimes have to be sedated to the point that they require artificial ventilation.
Does insurance cover that artificial ventilation?
Typically it does, but it's still a huge cost and something very difficult for these families to endure.
And so you have the emotional cost to the family, you have the physical cost to the child, the mental cost obviously to the child and the family, the financial cost to the family, and it just seems to me that there's a lot of misconception about what you're trying to do, in that for some reason there's this misconception that this is just a gateway to legalizing marijuana. Is that not true?
That is not true. This is very narrowly drafted. It cannot be smoked. It has to be prescribed by 2 specialists, and it's taken orally.
And we can't wait for the FDA, is that correct?
My concern is these families and these kids do not have the time to wait. Waiting 8 to 10 years, how many more will lose their lives due to a seizure between now and then?
Thank you, Representative Cliff.
Thank you.
Mr. Rinaldi, for what purpose?
Will the gentlelady yield?
For a question, yes.
Lady yields.
Thank you. This is not a medicinal marijuana bill, correct?
I would agree. This is a very narrowly drafted CBD-only bill.
And CBD oil, that's the main ingredient in a drug that's currently being used in trials at Children's Hospital in Dallas and other areas as well, correct?
It's one of about 84 different ingredients that you typically see in the plant.
Okay, and there's a drug, Epidiolex, that
Correct.
includes CBD oil and is for the same treatment as well, correct?
Correct.
So what this would effectively do is speed the Epidiolex trial and make it legal earlier than the 6 years. Not necessarily the brand name, but
We see this as a bridge to get us to a point that this might be a drug available at some time in the future.
okay. Do you know how far away we are from a CBD oil drug being approved by the FDA?
You know, it typically takes 8 to 10 years to go through that approval process, and this is still a relatively new study that's being conducted.
And the last question I had, CBD oil, it doesn't come from the marijuana plant. This would come from a separate plant, correct?
It comes from the cannabis plant. It's in the same plant family.
But it's a low THC variety
That's
of the
correct.
plant, correct? Okay, thank you.
Mr.